We hadn't planned on venturing so deep into the woods. It was supposed to be a simple day hike, just me and a few friends getting away from the city for a while. The New Jersey forests were dense, but we had a trail map and enough provisions for a few hours of exploration. Somewhere along the way, though, the trail markers became harder to spot, and before I realized it, we were way off course. It was Sam who first noticed the path. Overgrown and barely noticeable, it seemed to snake off into the trees like it had been long forgotten. "Check this out," he called, waving us over. There, half buried under moss and leaves, was a trail I was sure wasn't on our map. Something about it looked wrong, like it shouldn't be there, but at the same time there was an undeniable pull. "Should we?" I asked, more out of a sense of responsibility than genuine concern. I think we all knew what the answer would be. We'd come out here for a little adventure, after all, and this path promised exactly that. We ventured down the trail, the sounds of the forest muffled by the thick canopy above us. The further we went, the stranger it became. The trees grew closer together, their branches hanging low, almost like they were trying to block our way. The air felt different too, heavier, like we had crossed some invisible threshold. After what felt like an eternity, the trees finally parted. And there it was, an entire town, hidden deep within the forest, like something out of a nightmare. The houses were old, their windows shattered or boarded up, roofs sagging under years of decay. We stood there, frozen, staring at this forgotten place that didn't seem like it belonged in our time, or even our world. "This is insane," Jess whispered, her voice barely more than a breath. I couldn't argue with her. My skin prickled with unease, every instinct screaming that we should turn back. But, like the trail before, the town drew us in. It didn't make sense, but there was something about it, something that made leaving impossible. So we stepped forward into the unknown. At first glance, the town looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The buildings were crumbling, their wooden frames warped and broken, roofs sagging as if the weight of time had finally won. Rusted-out cars sat lifeless in overgrown yards, their paint chipped away, leaving only skeletal frames behind. It felt like we had stepped into a ghost town, a place that nature had long since reclaimed. But then, I started noticing things, little details that didn't add up. There were footprints in the dirt, fresh ones. They weren't deep, but the pattern was unmistakable. Someone had walked this path recently, maybe even today. My heart skipped a beat. I glanced at the others, wondering if they'd seen it too, but no one said a word. They just kept moving forward, eyes wide, as if drawn by the same force that had pulled us down that hidden trail. As we walked deeper into the town, the sense of abandonment began to shift. The soil in front of one of the houses looked freshly disturbed, as though someone had dug something up or buried it there not too long ago. I stopped, staring at the uneven patch of earth, my mind racing. Why would anyone be out here? What could they possibly want in a place like this? "Hey, look at this," Jess called out, pointing to a window on the second floor of a dilapidated house. I followed her gaze, and that's when I saw it. A faint flicker of light. A candle, burning in the window, the flame swaying ever so slightly in the still air. My mouth went dry. For the first time, I felt real fear creeping in. I had been unsettled before, but now it felt like we were being watched. My skin crawled, and I couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on us, hiding in the shadows of those crumbling walls. There was no logical explanation for the candle, no reason why it should still be burning unless someone had lit it recently. "Okay, this is getting weird," Sam muttered, his voice low and tense. He wasn't wrong. Everything about this place screamed that it should be abandoned, yet the signs of life or something close to it were undeniable. The more we walked, the more wrong it felt. I scanned the windows, the rooftops, the narrow alleyways between the houses, expecting to see movement out of the corner of my eye. Nothing, but the feeling persisted. Unease crept over me like a cold fog. Were we really alone here, or had something been waiting for us to arrive? Every instinct told me to leave, to turn around and never look back. But something deeper, darker, kept me rooted to the spot. We couldn't leave. Not yet. Something or someone was here and I had to know what. The house we chose to explore was the most intact of the bunch. But that wasn't saying much. The front door hung on a single hinge, creaking as we pushed it open. Inside, dust clung to every surface, and the air was thick with the scent of rot and decay. Broken furniture littered the floor, and the walls were stained with water damage and age. It was like stepping into a time capsule, only one that had been forgotten for far too long. We spread out, cautiously moving through the darkened rooms. I could feel the weight of the place pressing down on me, as if the very walls were watching. My footsteps echoed off the bare wooden floorboards, each creak amplifying the eerie silence that surrounded us. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, faint at first but unmistakable. They came from somewhere upstairs, slow and deliberate, as if someone, or something, was pacing back and forth. I froze, listening intently. The others were scattered across the house, but none of them were upstairs. I was certain of it. "Did you guys hear that?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Yeah. What the hell is that?" Jess whispered, her eyes wide as she glanced toward the staircase. We all went still, straining to hear. The footsteps continued, but they didn't sound right. Too heavy. Too slow. My heart pounded in my chest, the fear gnawing at me, telling me to get out of there. And then came the whispers. They were low, almost imperceptible, like voices carried on the wind. But there was no wind. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once, surrounding us. I couldn't make out any words, just that soft, eerie murmur that made my skin crawl. "Okay, we need to leave," Sam said, his voice cracking. He was trying to sound calm, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He wasn't wrong. Everything about this place screamed at us to run, but I couldn't move. Something kept me rooted there, a sick curiosity gnawing at the back of my mind. "I think we should stay," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Even as the words left my mouth, I couldn't believe I was saying them. But there was something here, something more than just an abandoned town or creepy noises. It was like the place wanted us to stay, like it was trying to show us something. Jess shot me a look. "Are you serious? We're not alone here. We need to go." She was right, of course, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if we left now, we'd never know the truth. I stepped closer to one of the walls, my flashlight illuminating strange symbols carved into the wood. Symbols that I didn't recognize. They were crude but deliberate, like someone or something had taken the time to mark this place. Nearby, an old shelf held odd objects. What looked like animal bones, small, twisted dolls made of straw, and strange trinkets I couldn't identify. Everything about the house felt wrong, like it had been abandoned, but not forgotten. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, and the footsteps upstairs seemed to echo through the house, growing closer. My stomach churned with a mix of fear and something else, something darker. Whatever was happening here, it wasn't normal. It wasn't safe. But I couldn't leave. Not yet. Night fell faster than I expected. One moment, the sky was that deep, dusky blue, and the next, the darkness swallowed the town whole. It was the kind of darkness that pressed in from all sides, suffocating and endless. My flashlight beam cut through it, but barely. The streets, which had felt abandoned and empty during the day, now seemed alive. We had tried to leave, tried retracing our steps to the path that led us here. But no matter how far we walked, the way out was gone. It was as if the trail had never existed. All we found were more empty streets, more crumbling buildings, and the oppressive feeling that something or someone was watching us. Every time I looked over my shoulder, I swore I saw movement in the corners of my vision, shadows slipping between the buildings. But when I turned to look directly, there was nothing, only the lingering sense that we weren't alone. "We should have left earlier," Jess muttered, her voice trembling. She was clutching her flashlight like a lifeline, her eyes darting to every sound, every flicker of movement. I didn't have the heart to tell her that I agreed, that I was just as scared as she was. Fear gnawed at my insides, but I kept moving forward, trying to hide the rising panic. Then came the whispers, but this time they weren't distant or faint like before. They were in my head. Words or fragments of words, swirling in a language I couldn't understand. It felt like they were being spoken just behind my ear, voices that didn't belong to anyone in our group. I whipped around, expecting to see someone standing behind me, but the street was empty. My heart pounded in my chest, the fear threatening to choke me. "I'm hearing things," Sam whispered, his voice shaking. "Voices? Are you guys hearing this?" I nodded slowly, afraid to admit it, but I knew he wasn't imagining it. None of us were. We were hearing the same thing. Those soft, insistent voices that seemed to come from within, not from the outside world. It was like the town was speaking to us, worming its way into our minds. And then the visions started. At first, it was just flashes. Faces in the windows, staring back at me with hollow, empty eyes. But the more I blinked, the more vivid they became. I saw people, or at least what looked like people, standing in the shadows between the buildings, their forms shifting and swaying like they were made of smoke. They were just out of reach, just far enough that I couldn't make out their faces. But I could feel their eyes on me. "Do you see them?" Jess asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with terror. I nodded again. I saw them too. Every step we took, the feeling of being hunted grew stronger. The once silent streets now echoed with the faint sound of footsteps, not ours, but someone or something, following just out of sight. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and no matter how fast we walked, I could feel them closing in. The shadows seemed to shift and bend, taking on forms that moved in ways they shouldn't. We stopped in front of one of the houses, panting, our breath coming out in ragged gasps. The weight of the darkness was unbearable now, the oppressive energy of the town closing in around us like a trap. "We have to get out of here," Sam said, panic rising in his voice. "We're not alone. Something's out there, and it's watching us." I wanted to reassure him, to tell him that we'd find our way out, but I couldn't. The truth was I felt it too. Something was out there, lurking in the dark, waiting for us to make a mistake. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, like they were digging into my mind. The air felt thick with malice, and every shadow seemed to move with intent. We were being hunted, and whatever it wasn't going to let us leave. Terror gnawed at the edges of my sanity, twisting reality until I couldn't tell what was real anymore. Every creak, every whisper, every shadow felt like a threat. I had never felt so helpless, so trapped. We couldn't see them, but we could feel them, always watching, always waiting. And I knew, deep down, that the worst was yet to come. We were running in circles. No matter which street we turned down, we always ended up back where we started. It was like the town had shifted, warping around us, trapping us inside. The whispers in my head were louder now, relentless, feeding off our fear. Sam was hyperventilating, Jess barely holding it together. The shadows seemed to follow us, growing darker, more solid, as if they were closing in. Then I saw it. In one of the houses, a decrepit, sagging structure on the edge of town. There was a flicker of movement. Something compelled me to go inside. A pull stronger than fear, stronger than logic. I stepped forward without thinking, my heart racing as I crossed the threshold. The others hesitated, but they followed, too scared to let me out of their sight. Inside, the house was worse than any of the others. The air was thick with dust, and the floor groaned beneath our weight. But there was something else. A faint, rotting smell that seemed to come from deep within the walls. We passed through the main room, barely noticing the dilapidated furniture, until we reached what looked like a study. On the desk, half hidden beneath debris and cobwebs, was an old leather-bound journal. I don't know why I picked it up. Maybe I thought it would hold some answers, something to explain the strange things we'd seen. But as soon as I opened it, my stomach twisted. The handwriting was shaky, desperate, and the first few pages were filled with ramblings about curses, rituals, and sacrifices. The further I read, the colder the room seemed to become. The journal belonged to someone who had lived in this town, someone who had been part of a ritual that bound the souls of the dead to this land, trapping them here for eternity. They had summoned something, some dark force, and it had taken control. The whispers. They were the voices of those who had died here, tethered to the town, doomed to haunt it forever. "We have to get out of here," I whispered, my voice shaking. "This place, it's cursed." Sam grabbed the journal from my hands, his eyes scanning the pages as quickly as he could. "This can't be real," he muttered, but the fear in his voice betrayed him. It was real, and we were in the middle of it. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from upstairs, followed by the sound of heavy footsteps pounding down the staircase. My heart leapt into my throat. Something was coming. "We need to move. Now," Jess said, her voice barely holding back her terror. We turned and bolted for the door, but as we reached the threshold, the house seemed to shudder. The walls creaked, groaning like they were alive, and the floorboards under our feet buckled. The town was waking up. We sprinted down the street, but the once empty houses now seemed to pulse with life. Shadows moved inside the windows, figures standing just beyond the doors, watching us, waiting. The ground beneath us felt unstable, as if the very earth was trying to swallow us whole. The whispers turned into a deafening roar, filling my head with incoherent words, pushing me to the brink of madness. Every turn felt like a dead end. The streets twisted and shifted, pulling us deeper into the maze. I could feel the town tightening its grip, as if it was trying to hold us here, to make us part of its dark history. My breath came in ragged gasps, my legs burning with exhaustion, but I couldn't stop. We couldn't stop. We were almost at the edge of the town when I heard Jess scream. I turned to see her stumbling, her ankle caught in a crack in the road. The shadows were closing in around her, the figures moving faster now, closing the distance. "Help me!" she cried, panic in her voice. Sam and I rushed back, grabbing her arms and pulling her free. For a split second, I felt something brush against my skin, cold, like death itself. But we pulled Jess out, and together we ran. The trees finally came into view, the edge of the forest, the way out. I didn't know if it was real or just another trick, but I didn't care. We ran for it, pushing through the last stretch of darkness as the town behind us seemed to howl in anger. The ground trembled, the buildings groaning as they leaned toward us, as if the town itself was reaching out, trying to drag us back. But we made it. We burst through the trees, collapsing onto the forest floor, gasping for air. The town. It was gone. Or maybe it was never really there. The oppressive feeling lifted, and the whispers in my head finally stopped. For a moment, I thought we were safe. But as I looked back into the trees, I saw them. Faint, shadowy figures watching us from the edge of the woods, waiting. We had escaped, but something told me we hadn't truly left the town behind. It was still with us. It always would be.